You think danger looks like aggression, a raised voice, a clenched fist, an obvious betrayal, a clear enemy. But real danger, the kind that rewires your self-worth, that turns your empathy into a weapon against yourself, doesn't arrive with a warning. It smiles, it listens, it hugs you when you're breaking, and then it quietly feeds. The most dangerous people are not strangers. They're the ones who feel familiar. They're in your kitchen, on your couch, sleeping next to you, calling you their best friend. And the wound they leave behind is not a bruise. It's a distortion of reality, of memory, of who you think you are. You begin to question your tone, doubt your intentions, blame yourself for their anger, apologize for things you didn't do. You try harder, give more, shrink further, until one day, you don't know where they end, and you begin. This is not about evil. This is about the unconscious. The blind spots in others that pull you into storms that aren't yours to weather. It's about the charm that distracts you from the manipulation, the softness that conceals the psychic invasion, the calm that hides the chaos underneath. You've been exhausted for a long time, not from what you do, but from what you carry, and most of it was never yours. So before we go further, if you've ever been turned into someone's therapist or villain or emotional sponge, this video is for you, not to give you answers, but to remind you of something older than advice. You do not owe your life to someone else's unconscious. This is a mirror, not for blame, but for awakening. If that speaks to you, I invite you gently to subscribe, not for me, but for you, because this isn't content, it's clarity, and it's time. Now let's begin. There is an invisible architecture beneath every relationship you've ever had, not made of words, not made of logic, but of psyche, of wounds, of longing, of energy. Carl Jung didn't see people as simply good or bad. He saw them as unconscious or conscious, and most of what we suffer in others comes from what they do not see in themselves. Let's begin there. Projection is the psyche's first defense, and its most dangerous weapon. When someone carries pain they refuse to face, the unconscious doesn't sit quietly. It leaks, it spills, it seeks a container, and that container is often you. You stop being a person. You become a symbol of their betrayal, of their shame, of their absent father, of the partner who left, and they react to that symbol, not you, which is why their rage feels misplaced, why their expectations feel impossible, why their wounds feel personal when they're not. You've been caught in a projection loop, and the more empathetic you are, the deeper you sink into a role you never asked for. Then comes the persona, the mask they wear to survive, to seem functional, respectable, in control. The persona is not inherently bad. We all need it. But when someone identifies only with their mask, everything behind it gets buried alive. The smile becomes a prison. The performance becomes a pathology. They stop being someone you can connect to and become someone you have to perform with. You feel it in your body. That stiffness, that sense of falseness, that quiet pressure to stay agreeable, acceptable, contained, and deeper still, is the shadow. This is what they cannot allow themselves to be. The rage they swallow, the jealousy they deny, the desires they moralize away. It doesn't disappear. It sinks and festers and waits until it finds you, the safe one, the soft one, the one who's strong enough to carry what they've buried. They don't consciously decide this, but their unconscious does, and suddenly you're holding their grief, their guilt, their ghosts. Jung called this phenomenon the transference of psychic energy. It's not always visible. It doesn't shout. It whispers through dynamics, through roles that repeat, through the weight you feel after certain conversations, like your soul has been drained, drop by drop, because people feed, not just on food or time, but on attention, on emotional labor, on psychic availability. If you've ever walked away from a person and felt mysteriously smaller, you felt it. You're not in a relationship, you're in a projection field. You are not being loved. You're being used as a reflection, a container, a crutch. This doesn't mean the other person is a monster. They may not even be aware they're doing it. But unconsciousness is not harmless. It is chaotic. And when it's close, intimate, trusted, it becomes devastating. Here's the deeper truth. You are not just in relationship with people. You are in relationship with their unconscious. And if they don't know what's in there, you will end up living with it. In the silence, in the blame, in the confusion, in the burnout that has no visible cause. That's what Jung meant when he said, "What you do not make conscious will direct your life." and you will call it fate. But it's not fate. It's psychology. And now that we see the structure, we can begin to name the 6 archetypal figures that Jung, were he alive today, might call emotionally dangerous. Not because they're bad, but because they are blind. Not because they intend harm, but because they are possessed by unexamined psychic material that moves through them like weather, without their consent and without yours. Each of these 6 carries a shadow. Each wears a mask. Each is starving for energy, and you are the nearest source. They will call it love. They will call it closeness. They will call it connection. But your body will call it something else. Exhaustion, tension, a silent wish to run. You may not have had the words for it until now. So let's name what's been living unnamed. Let's walk together through the inner terrain of these 6 dangerous psychic patterns. And if you're still here, if you felt your own reality reflected in what you've just heard, consider subscribing now. Not because this is a channel, but because this is your mirror, and the next step in your remembering. Let's begin. 1. The unconscious manipulator. They don't enter through the front door. They come in through your empathy. At first, they seem wounded, soft-spoken, fragile, deep. You think you've found someone who finally shows their emotions, someone who just needs a little more love, a little more patience, a little more care. But time reveals something colder beneath the tenderness. They are not relating to you. They are clinging to the idea of you, the helper, the healer, the emotional sponge. And every time you hold space for their sorrow, you disappear a little more. You'll notice the pattern in the silence that follows your no, in the subtle guilt after you set a boundary, in how somehow you're always the one who hurt them, even when you said nothing at all. This is projection in its most seductive form. Their pain doesn't go inward, it goes outward, onto you. You become responsible for emotions you didn't cause. You become their therapist, their savior, their mirror. And your own needs? They vanish. Jung would say, this is the shadow, unowned, weaponized through closeness. What is unconscious in us, he warned, will be lived out in others. And you are now that other. You'll begin to feel perpetually guilty, emotionally foggy, as though no matter what you do, it's not enough, because it isn't. Not for them, not for the shadow that speaks through them. They are not malicious, but they are draining. This is not love. This is psychic hunger disguised as connection. 2. The bearer of the persona. There are people who live behind a mask so polished you forget there's a human being behind it. They are kind, charming, well-spoken. They always say the right thing, never raise their voice, and never allow themselves to be vulnerable. At first, they're magnetic, safe, stable, but soon something feels off. The warmth feels scripted. The connection feels hollow. You laugh, but your chest feels cold. You cry, but they don't move. Because you are not talking to a person. You are talking to a persona. Jung described the persona as the social mask we wear to survive. It helps us adapt, perform roles, fit in. But when someone believes they are their mask, when they've merged with the image they perform, everything authentic is buried beneath it. They are not being kind. They are performing kindness. They are not listening. They are mirroring interest. And when you finally show them your truth, your anger, your confusion, your need, they flinch. They withdraw. They become ice. Because your realness threatens the mask they've fused with. The bearer of the persona often expects you to play along, to be agreeable, contained, socially smooth. If you break script, they punish you with distance, coldness, passive withdrawal. This is not a relationship. This is a stage play. And you, the living, breathing soul that you are, don't belong on a stage. Jung warned that over-identification with the persona leads to spiritual sterility. When a person can no longer access their own rawness, they cannot receive yours. You will begin to feel like your emotions are too loud, like your depth is too much, and you will start to shrink, not to upset the mask, but what dies in that shrinking. You. Bit by bit. 3. The owner of the repressed shadow. They are composed, disciplined, impeccably polite. Their life looks perfect on the outside. But beneath that polished exterior, a storm is gathering. These people believe in control. They believe in righteousness. They believe in never being messy, never being angry, never being wrong. And everything they reject in themselves, every impulse, emotion, shadow, doesn't disappear. It festers. And eventually, it erupts. Jung called this the shadow. Everything we deny, avoid, moralize, and push into the basement of the psyche. But the basement has limits, and when it overflows, it doesn't knock politely. The owner of the repressed shadow explodes in moments that don't make sense. A forgotten dish triggers a rage, a soft comment becomes a battlefield. Their anger is disproportionate, their silence is weaponized, and you're left stunned, confused, ashamed for something that had nothing to do with you. These are the people who hold everything in until they can't. Jung warned, the stronger the persona, the more powerful the shadow. And the explosion you felt was not about the present moment, it was the accumulated grief of a lifetime of self-repression. But they won't see it. They'll call you dramatic, disrespectful, too emotional. They will deny the intensity of their outbursts, and in doing so, deny your reality. Living with them feels like tiptoeing across a minefield. You watch your words, you shrink your truth, you try to manage their mood, but no matter how careful you are, the detonation always comes. Because this isn't about you. It's about what they've refused to face, and until they do, you will be the target of their repressed fire. For the moral controller, they speak in absolutes. They say things like, I'm only telling you because I care. Or someone has to be the adult in this situation. They carry themselves as beacons of virtue, ethical, mature, grounded. At first, they seem like safe harbors. They don't yell, they don't collapse. They just correct you endlessly. At first, it might feel like guidance, then it begins to feel like judgment, and eventually it feels like a slow erasure of your humanity. What you're allowed to feel shrinks. What you're allowed to express dims. And you start to believe that your very aliveness is wrong. Jung spoke of the moral shadow, that when we cling too tightly to righteousness, we exile the very instincts that keep us whole. The moral controller projects their disowned desires, rage, envy, and longing onto everyone else, and then attacks it in them. They don't say, I'm uncomfortable with desire. They say you're being inappropriate. They don't say, I'm terrified of being wrong. They say, you're reckless and dangerous. You'll notice how being around them makes you feel small, like you're constantly walking through an invisible courtroom. Everything you say is cross-examined. Every truth you share becomes a moral question. But here's the truth. They're not protecting morality. They're protecting their ego from collapse. Their image is their fortress. Their judgment is their weapon. And they'll claim to be helping you. But really, they're regulating their own anxiety by policing your freedom. This is not correction. This is shadow in disguise. Jung said, in every moral statement lies the repressed opposite. And with the moral controller, you are not being guided. You are being controlled by a person who cannot tolerate their own contradiction. 5. The complexed individual. They are tender, explosive, then tender again. They tell you they love you, and later tell you that you've ruined their life. You never know which version you'll get. And so, you begin to prepare for both, all the time. This person doesn't just have feelings. They are possessed by them. Jung called these psychic eruptions complexes. Autonomous inner fragments formed through trauma, pain, and unresolved history. They are like inner personalities, each with its own voice, story, and unmet need. When someone is overtaken by a complex, they are no longer responding to you. They are responding to a parent who abandoned them, a betrayal that broke them, a story they never digested, but they don't know that. They think their rage is justified. Their collapse is your fault. You said something small, and suddenly you're watching them spiral into grief, fury, withdrawal. And you begin to wonder if you're the crazy one. You're not. You're just living with someone whose inner world is in pieces, and those pieces speak. Jung wrote, complexes are the splinter psyches that live a life of their own, and if they are unintegrated, they drive the bus. While the conscious self sits quietly in the back seat, wondering what just happened. These people often apologize. They weep, they swear it won't happen again, and for a while they're soft again. But the moment passes, the next trigger arrives, and the cycle begins again. The deeper danger here is that the inconsistency becomes addictive. You remember the good moments, you hold on to their potential, you rationalize the pain, and in doing so, you abandon yourself. You begin to shapeshift, to avoid awakening the next complex. You talk softer, you make yourself smaller, and soon, you are no longer living freely. You are managing someone else's internal chaos. This isn't relationship, it's survival. And survival will never lead to wholeness. 6. The psychic vampire. They don't explode, they don't shout, They don't judge, they need. Softly, constantly, endlessly. At first, it feels sweet. They want to be close, they want to talk every day. They want your presence, your insight, your heart. It feels flattering until it doesn't. Soon, your time is no longer yours. Your silence becomes an offense. Your boundaries become a betrayal. You are no longer seen as a person. You are a source of comfort, of attention, of psychic nutrition. Jung warned about symbiosis, when two people blur their boundaries so deeply, they forget where one ends and the other begins. The psychic vampire lives in this state, and they are starving. But here's the cruelty of it. You can never feed them enough. No matter how much you give, they are still empty. Because the emptiness is not about you, it's a hole formed long ago. And you, for all your compassion, are not the one who can fill it. You begin to feel emotionally bankrupt, not from drama, but from proximity. You leave every conversation more tired than before. You begin to dread their name lighting up your phone. You want to rest, but their pain won't let you. And when you finally step back, they cry, they panic, they accuse, they make you feel like you're the one who failed, but you didn't fail. You just finally said no, not to love, but to leakage. Jung would say, the self must be distinguished to be preserved, and that means pulling back, even when it breaks your heart. Because fusion is not love, and enmeshment is not connection, it is disappearance, yours. And so we've seen them all. The 6 shadows that wear the faces of friends, lovers, mentors, family, they do not come with malice, but they do come with force. And if you're not awake to it, you become the battleground for someone else's war. These people are not evil, but they are unconscious. And in Jungian psychology, unconsciousness is the root of all danger. Not because it seeks to harm, but because it knows not what it does. In our final act, we return to you, not to fix, not to judge, but to reclaim. Because the most important question isn't, who are they? It's, where have I abandoned myself in the name of love? Let's go there. Together. You were never meant to be a mirror for someone else's shadow. You were never meant to carry emotions that weren't yours. And you were never meant to contort your truth just to keep someone else's psyche from unraveling. Let that sink in, because somewhere along the way, you confused compassion with self-erasure. You mistook endurance for love. You called it maturity to be the stable one while someone else collapsed, blamed, projected, or consumed. But real maturity isn't staying in dynamics that poison your soul. It's knowing when to leave the projection field. It's knowing when to stop explaining yourself to someone who isn't truly looking at you. It's knowing that silence isn't a punishment. It's a sacred signal that your boundaries are finally speaking. You are not a projection screen. You are a sovereign psyche, not a fixer, not a savior, not a symbol, a self. And if that means disappointing people who were never seeing the real you to begin with, then so be it. Because every time you abandon yourself to be understood, you dissolve just a little more. Jung taught that the path of individuation, of becoming whole, requires that we reclaim our projections, own our shadows, and draw back the energy we've scattered into others. You don't need to diagnose anyone. You don't need to change them. You don't need to make them see. You need to see yourself again, and choose from that seeing, without guilt, without apology. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from the story you were cast into and begin the work of writing your own. No more carrying what was never yours. No more offering your soul as a landfill for other people's shame. No more mistaking psychic enmeshment for love. You are allowed to be whole. And that wholeness begins the moment you stop participating in what breaks you. This video was not about them. It was about you, your energy, your clarity, your awakening. And if something in you stirred, if something rose like a memory that had no words until now, you can name it in the comments. Sometimes speaking it is the first act of sovereignty. And if this reflection helped you come home to yourself, subscribe. Not because this is content, but because this is a mirror. And sometimes we need a voice that reminds us of who we were before we were turned into someone else's idea. Individuation begins now, not in theory, but in choice. Welcome back.